change just may be the only constant that we have during this human experience. What are some of the ways that we can personally and professionally handle and manage these changes? And spiritually, what's the dark side of spiritual growth and spiritual communities that we need to confront when we do self-growth work? Hey y'all, I'm Reese, and welcome to Making Meaning. Making Meaning is a podcast by the Cohere Collective, here to help guide you along your path to make meaning in a way that makes sense for you. This week, I am sitting down with author, mentor, and speaker Kelly Wendorf. Kelly has released her novel Flying Lead Change, which takes its title as well as much of its wisdom from a horse, from the way that horses will change their gallop mid-gallop. Clearly, I don't know much about horses, but they have become masters of changing in the midst of life's craziest moments. And Kelly and I discuss how she approaches life's most challenging pivots and the skills and lessons that we can learn from the world around us, from nature, from other beings, and from other communities that may do things a little bit differently than we do. We also dig into our spiritual stories. Kelly has a beautifully vast personal tale that is really important to delve into, as we discussed a lot of personal things that she covered in the book that really help inform us along this path of making meaning and pursuing purpose. Both of our passions are deeply aligned, and I think that you can really feel that resonance come through in this episode. If you are interested in reading Flying Lead Change, working with Kelly, or her organization Equus, all of the links to do all of those beautiful things will be in the video description down below or episode description, wherever you may be listening or watching. If you would like to work with me to find and pursue your purpose, more links for that will be down below as well, so you can discover Coherent Design, the Cohere Collective's unique approach to life coaching that partners with you as you make your own meaning. If you're curious about the Cohere Collective, other information about making meaning, or the other content and services that we offer, links to our website and other shows and all of the goodies will be in the description as well. I believe that is all I have for you, so as always, let's take a deep breath. And get started. Well, Kelly, firstly, thank you so much for being here, for your time and energy today, and your openness of spirit already. Just being on this call with you and your curiosity towards me and my work is so appreciated. And I'm just really excited to be sharing this space with you. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Reese. It's a pleasure, and I share in the experience of your openness. So I look forward to our journey together today.
Yes, me too. Well, to keep this gratitude train going a little bit, I always like to start with gratitude to set the tone for a conversation. So, first question, what's just one thing you're grateful for right now?
So terrific. It's a great, I've listened to a few of your podcasts, and I love that question, and it does change the tone of things to just go right there. There are so many things I'm grateful for, things and people and energies I'm grateful for in my life. And I think of all of them, the one I'm most grateful for is the fact that I have that gratefulness molecule somewhere in my body. There are so many people where they may read about gratitude, they may understand about gratitude, they've certainly had opportunities to experience gratitude, but for whatever reason, their neurobiology doesn't land there easily. And that isn't the way I'm wired. And I'm so grateful that I get to have that gratitude experience for so many things and people. Because I didn't make that happen. That kind of came with the packaging when I was born, and it didn't have to be that way. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, what a beautiful thing to be grateful for and mindful of the gifts that we are all given, right? Because I do think that it's almost a spectrum of how easy it is for us to fall into gratitude. Because I think there was certainly a time in my life where it wasn't as easy for me to go there. And there is this kind of training that I think a lot of us have to do to build the muscle of walking down the path of gratitude. Um, so what a beautiful self-aware moment. I love that. Second question to break open our conversation is, what is your story? I know a lot of it is discussed in your book, Flying Lead Change, which of course we will get to here in a moment and is linked down below wherever you are listening if you are curious about it for our listeners. But what is your story? Whatever you feel called to share right now.
Thank you. So where do I want to start? I think when I was young, I was a really, really sensitive kid, very attuned to the natural world and to marginalized communities. I was born in the 60s and Vietnam was raging, and Time magazine had a lot of pictures that I saw as a young child, we lived in the mountains of New Mexico for at least part of my childhood, and all the logging trucks coming down the road with these massive trees cut. And so my recollection of that time was one of, I would say, profound melancholy, of just so much to feel, and so much. You talk about coherence. I use the word congruence in a lot of ways, and they're related. They're
Mm-hmm.
wonderful siblings, those two words. But the incongruence of what the narrative was by the adults, and not being able to make sense of that incongruence. Like, how could there be so much environmental destruction, cruelty to animals, cruelty to children, bullying, war? How could there be all that and yet people walk around like everything is okay?
Yeah.
And how can I be upset about something, and that's a very real, true, authentic, felt sense, and yet I'm told, to wipe that smile, that frown off your face, and stop crying and stop being so sensitive. And so I think at a really young age, and maybe this is true for like most kids, but certainly for me, the start of my journey of becoming ultimately an executive coach, and spiritual mentor, was to acutely feel this incongruence in the space. And it always became a place of in a way tension, like when I was a really small kid, I would when I was like 6, 7, I made these huge posters, stuck them on little sticks, and walked around the streets, do not pollute, stuff like that. So I was always a little social justice advocate, all
I love
alone.
that.
And that led me, that was the through line, has always been the through line, and continues to be a through line of my life, is increasing levels of congruence and coherence with who I am, who the world is, and how that manifests. So I'm grateful, for those experiences, because that was sort of the seed. I spent the better part of my childhood in the company of horses and nature. I was a horse crazy girl. And so spent just most of my days. And back in those days, parents, like, it was the parenting of benign neglect. Like, as long as you came home by dinner, otherwise they didn't know what you were doing or what you were up to. And they didn't really care. I mean, they were overwhelmed with their own world and their own life. Right. And it's fine. There's some wonderfulness to that style of parenting. Because I was given a lot of freedom. And so really, the natural world became apparent to me. And the natural world is very uncompromising. If didn't pay attention to where you were walking and ended up in the woods 1 hour deep and didn't pay attention and you were lost, you were lost. And, so she taught you, pay attention, right? And same with the horses, very strict tutelage of, are you listening? Are you paying attention? Are you being present at this moment? Because if you're not, you're on your head. And so I appreciate that tutelage very much. And there was something inside the natural world in that it is coherent. It is congruent. I learned from the horse world, and the horses are we'll talk about this later, but they're a 56 million year old system. They're one of the oldest, most successful mammals on the planet, second only to the platypus at 150 million. So this really ancient system that has been highly successful is an animal prey, highly attuned to its environment. And what I learned from them is they, unlike humans, they don't have an issue with how I think, how I feel, how I show up. None of that. The old cowboys used to say, like, don't let them know you're afraid, because then they'll take it right, which is baloney. They don't have a problem with that felt sense of fear in you. What they have a problem with, what really ignites their nervous system, is incongruence. So if I go to a horse and I'm pretending like I'm present, but I'm not, or if I'm fearful and I'm not really aligned and being present with that fear, if I'm in some way trying to push it away or trying to muscle through it, that feels incongruent to a horse. And the reason incongruence is such a big deal to an animal prey is that's exactly how it feels when a predator is about to eat them. I'm hiding in the grass. I'm not hungry. I'm not here. That's the kind of, from a horse's point of view, it's like, whoa, wait a minute.
Right.
Like,
the masking.
Right. The masking. Exactly. I don't see the lion, but something's not adding up.
Yeah. Right.
So I learned from their teaching that to be authentic, and honestly, I'm still learning. I'm still decades and decades later unwrapping deeper levels of showing up with that level of attunement to self and attunement to other. Just yesterday, I was with an amazing mentor of mine named Warwick Schiller, who also has an amazing podcast, and he and I had this amazing day together, and it was all about like the slightest, the recognizing of the slightest, most minuscule moment that a horse is saying, I'm thinking about that. I recognize that. And us signaling to them, I see you, I get you. It's quite amazing. So very long story short, that instruction, but still I didn't know how to hang out in the people world so well. So that drove me to a very long spiritual quest. Spent some time in India, sat with a very profound sage who's no longer on the planet. By the time I met him, he must have been in his late 70s. Learned a lot about presence and being with one's own consciousness, which is, of course, connected to the collective consciousness of all. So, but interesting, even in that spiritual world, a lot of people who have not fully differentiated their egos as a solid human being, different from all the other individuals. And a lot of us who have been traumatized in childhood, which is, probably, 9/10 of us, are very attracted to these spiritual approaches that have us disappear ourselves into nothingness, into consciousness, to transcend the human experience as a form of enlightenment. But I later learned that to transcend, one needs a solid sense of self. You can't give away an ego you haven't fully formed.
Right.
So it ended up being a community of, really wonderful, kind, amazing, brilliant people who had missed some very fundamental developmental chapters in their life, and who were therefore either giving their power away way too easily or putting their power on top of people way too easily. It's the same coin, because it's a
Right.
power over, power under, right? So it could be highly toxic in these communities that, we're all about peace and love and joy and freedom. And again, there was this incongruence for me about but this is supposed to be peace, love, joy, freedom. And yet we're not talking about the planet. We're not putting our feet in the soil. We're not embodied. What do we do with the human body if it's just an illusion,
Right.
So that kind of led in some directions that weren't necessarily, well, they were good teaching moments. I'll just put it that way.
Sure.
The whole picture. And I did suffer at the hands of some really intense narcissistic folks and sociopathic folks. And that's not to say that the spiritual communities aren't worth spending time with. It's an important part of the human puzzle, is our connection to the divine. Having said that, it is fraught with some very unsavory personalities.
I don't want to interrupt your story, and I'll certainly cue you to go back into it here in a moment, but I do just have to throw out there how profound I think this piece is that you're sharing. It is something that is not talked about.
Nope.
And is so real.
Yep.
And is so felt. And I actually had a conversation with my therapist about a year ago, or maybe less than a year ago, when I was kind of in one of these communities, and it was really deeply activating for a lot of the pieces of myself that I was like, I'm really working to heal this, and there's something that's just coming up and mucking it up, and there's all these things. And my therapist was like, she in her wisdom was like, I couldn't tell you exactly what it is or why it is, but in these communities there is a draw for narcissism. There is a draw for people who, regardless of your kind of belief on whether it's predisposed to having these traits, or learned, or to no fault of a person's own, but when you have that experience, there is this tie there, and we need to be mindful of it as people who are trying to, like you said, it align with the divine sense of our human experience, while also getting really clear about we're embodied, we're human beings in this incarnation, in this iteration. That can't be ignored either. So I just have all the respect in the world for you sharing that. And I think too, this way that we hear love and light, love and light, love and light. Light casts a shadow, and we cannot ignore that either. So thank you for including that. I'll hand it back over to you with your story here.
Absolutely. And we can go right down any rabbit hole there, because, for a good, let's see, I headed to India when I was 28, and I would say for a good 25 years, I was, you wouldn't have known it had you known me, because I produced a magazine. I was a mom of 2 amazing kids, and, and I always presented like this. But what I can tell you is that I was wrestling with these really, really intense pathologies, and I'll say it that way. And the denial that is around these pathologies and these personas, because people need and want their guru. They need and want their spiritual teacher. They need and want their spiritual community. And so it's a no-touch zone. So it can be a very lonely kind of, and you can throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I didn't want to, because the baby was the very sacred, precious, important spiritual path. But it was surrounded in this bathwater of just awful, traumatizing, toxic stuff.
Hello, everyone. It's Reese, just briefly interrupting this conversation to ask you if you're enjoying it. I hope you are, and if so, consider subscribing or following wherever you may be listening or watching, leaving a comment down below, a 5-star rating, and a review. These are all wonderful ways to let me know that you're enjoying this, and let me know the content that you want to keep seeing from the collective. This is also an amazing way to support us, and it truly means so much to me. Okay, back to the conversation.
I look back now, and we talked about in the beginning about like this gratitude molecule, and I'm so grateful I have that. And I'm another molecule I have that I didn't make happen is that I will be broken open by things, not broken by things. I will take anything and turn it into a learning opportunity so I can grow. And who I got to become as a result of these very, very toxic situations is like so precious. So I'm grateful. And, it's powerful enough that I've often thought I should write a book, because I was in the living rooms of all these very famous people who you see in the bookstores. I was there. I saw everything with my own eyes. And I feel it needs to be exposed, but in a way that doesn't provoke people to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
Which requires quite some titration, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of in my 30s, 40s, I was I was living in Australia. I was really suffering from the consequences of being inside many of these communities. And I had pretty much thrown the baby out with the bathwater. I'd become quite cynical. I was mad at God. I just pretty much hated everybody. And it was bitter and shut down. And that was when I met a gentleman named Uncle Bob Randall, who is the listed custodial elder of Uluru. Uluru is the big rock in the center of Australia. People know it as Ayers Rock, but the real name is Uluru. And Uncle Bob and I met through a series of very magical circumstances and a lot of serendipity. And I was publishing a book and writing a book at the time, and he became somebody whose words became a part of the book. So I had an opportunity to sit down with someone from a 60,000-year-old culture, to listen to his stories, to listen to his teachings, and that returned me back to my spirituality. Because as an Aboriginal man, his spirituality is our connection to earth, is our connection to the rocks and the trees and the animals, not as a concept, but as an actual, right at this moment, living, breathing, embodied experience. And that's what had been missing for me in all those years in India and with all these transcendental sorts of approaches, was it connected earth to heaven through the conduit of my body. Mm-hmm. And that's when I really found my meaning, my purpose as a human. It's like all the things that had been dismantled and dismembered in my life and in my awareness suddenly just came together. And I knew that this is what I wanted to help people with. This is what I wanted, because when you come from this place of understanding your place and belonging in the kin-centric field of all of life, then you recognize what that through line is in your life, and you start to follow that much more profoundly, with much more courage.
Right, right.
Yeah. So that's sort of, there's many other sort of
Sure.
tangential things alongside that story, but Uncle Bob passed about 10 years ago, and what's manifested ultimately is a little ranch in northern New Mexico that's adjacent national forest. And I work with clients virtually. Most of my clients I work with like this on Zoom, but a lot of the clients will come and be here in person for a private retreat or some time here with the land and the horses and the neighboring indigenous peoples who surround this area, and get to remember. And I borrow that term from Resmaa Markham, who wrote the book My Grandmother's Hands. And he talks about remembering it's not just a remembering in our mind, a remembering of who we are and what matters to us and why we're here on planet Earth, but of coming back to our body, the member of our body, instead of being dismembered by all the incoherence out there, right?
Yes.
That we bring ourselves back embodied. What is my chest telling me? What is my stomach telling me? Where are my legs taking me? How do I experience life through my body? And yeah.
So beautiful. I am such a language nerd, and it makes me think of one of my favorite etymologies, which is etymology of the word religion, religio. Ligia, we can think of like ligament, to connect, but also in the muscles, right? And it is this to remember. Religion at its core was supposed to be this thing of exactly everything you just described. I don't want to try and use any other words, and the ones you used were beautiful and perfect. But I think, unfortunately, as we have seen, religion has been misused in some ways and is now a cause to forget sometimes.
Mhm.
But I love going back to that core of remembering, not just in this mental practice or even in this kind of esoteric metaphysical practice, but remembering in the body, and that we are made up of different members, right? Our arms
Yeah.
and legs, but also we are a member
Yeah.
of the broader whole. We are membered and a member
Yeah.
in
I
these
love
ways.
that. I love that. And I love the etymology of religion. I've never looked it up, and that just like lights up so many things, because isn't it fascinating that in the name of religion, so historically people were dismembered, right? Like
Yeah.
look at the all the the witch burnings and all these things in the name of religion, and how children are spanked, and people are shamed for their body, and it's actually the antithesis of what religion was originally intended to be.
Right.
Amazing. Yeah. Wow.
Fascinating. Well, right? Language is such a fascinating
Yeah.
thing. Well, to dive into the book that you have written, Flying Lead Change, which of course evokes or invokes, I should say, the beautiful creature of the horse that you've discussed with your work with Equus, and this beautiful movement that horses take
Mm.
in galloping, which I had never heard of. So it was fascinating to learn more about the mechanics of that, right? But I actually want to start almost exactly where you start, which is the epigraph before the introduction. And I find epigraphs are so powerful because any writer or author or artistic pursuit is, of course, standing on the shoulders of giants, right? We've all heard this about taking everything that we've learned and all of our experiences and the words and pictures and art of other people and kind of remembering them into a new work to share our specific lens through which we interpret these things. And this epigraph, I want to read it verbatim because I think it's so beautiful. Let me pull it up here. It is by Elise McClay and Bev Doolittle in When the Wind Had Wings. And it says, "A broken song beneath the snow, the echo of a soaring joy, a shape in the mist, a touch in the rain. In wilderness you come again. You tell us what we used to know. You speak for all the free wild things whose ways were ours when the wind had wings." And goosebumps, right? Just absolutely beautiful. But my main question here is, what is it that we used to know?
That's a great question. It was sort of a knowing itself, right? So the details of the knowing, it isn't as important as the knowing itself, that there is a template that is interconnected with all a sort of greater beingness, a greater livingness, a greater aliveness that means we can never go astray. I mean, we may make a less optimal turn right or left, but ultimately that knowingness is going to keep us on track. And so it's a deep trust in ourselves and who we are and how we are uniquely inclined. Kind of my ranch manager is a gentleman from the Tesuque Pueblo. He's a Native American gentleman. His name is Thunder Bear Yates. That's his real name, Thunder Bear. He says, we're all like, and he's young, he's like 32. And he says, we're all like snowflakes, like so, and the snowflakishness is the knowing supports that, and supports like never questioning one tiny little angle or shape or contour of that snowflakeness as it moves through time and space.
That's so beautiful. I love that. I think too, as we're talking about grounding these esoteric thoughts into this reality, of course, being called a snowflake has come to mean something very different in our culture now. And I always thought, what a funny thing to call someone, because boy, does that sound like such a compliment, right? That it's like, you are so unique, and like the ability of these crystals to form, it's really so beautiful. I love that. And I guess to kind of keep going on this thought, the idea of freedom, I think, is one that is coming up in these conversations a lot right now, in around American politics, the socioeconomic and environmental spheres. And you have a really beautiful system in the book, the system of core cultural pillars. And one thing that was so striking to me about this system is that freedom in the system lies right at the intersection between care and presence. It's the only one of the pillars that is exactly split by care and presence. And I thought that that was so powerful and really made me think of how we are conceiving of freedom today, and freedom being one of the core values of the American and of America, to reframe to it being about care and presence, I think is really powerful. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how this is, why it does sit at the intersection between care, right, for self, for others, to be caring and careful, but also presence, right, in this embodied way, and why, how maybe as a secondary B question, we can use this reframe of freedom in our lives right now.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, a little backstory to that model that you're alluding to. So as I mentioned previously, one of my most powerful teachers has been the horse. And it's tricky to talk about horses because there's just a lot of ideas and biases and, oh, horse girl and it's horses or whatever. But I have, as a lifelong horsewoman, increasingly had to look at the horse from a bunch of different perspectives, not the least of which is a neurobiological perspective and a biological perspective. So before I was a horsewoman, I was just very interested in nature and how nature works. And I want to pan the camera back to a little bit broader picture before I bring in those 7 principles of thriving that the horse culture embodies. So we've got nature, and nature is a 3.8 billion year old system. And of all the species that have ever been on planet Earth, 99% have gone extinct or have evolved to new forms. So everything that's around currently right now is the 1%, a different 1%. And this 1% over 3.8 billion years has figured out how to live on planet Earth, not just survive, but thrive. And so what is it about the way these species organize themselves, the way they operate, the way they adapt and transform? What is it about how they are that helps them to thrive? Now, humans on that, in that place are the babies. Depending on where you put the needle, 6 million years as the oldest mark for human beings. So we're the babies. We've not been around that long. So when we look at horses, we're looking at a system that's 56 million years old, been around a really long time through tectonic shifts and climate spikes and volcanic mega explosions. What is it about, why? What is it? How have they adapted so well and they're still here today thriving? And there's a lot of reasons why, but a big, big reason has to do with their culture. And they have a culture, just like elephants and wolves and gorillas have a culture. Not a lot's been written about their culture because they're largely seen as pets or a commodity. So people haven't researched them in the same way. But their culture is really fascinating. And it's wonderful to look at it through the lens of, wow, if that helped them to survive 56 million years through tectonic shifts and climate spikes and explosions and pandemics, what can we learn from that culture as humans to help us thrive, right? So a lot of people have learned that the lead horse in a herd is the stallion. We have all this Hollywood, and we got the gladiator stallion who's fighting, all this thing. Well, that has nothing to do with leadership. That's breeding. And what they found in wild herds and domestic herds, if the domestic herd can operate like together in the way that they're intended, is that the leader is usually a mare. It's a female. The leadership is a matriarchy. In a domestic herd, if they don't have a female in the herd, then it'll be a quieter, more contemplative, more present male horse. They do not operate in a sort of violence, dominance paradigm. It's very much a power with paradigm, power with and power to. Most of contemporary human culture is power over. And we can go all over the map on that one, how it manifests. Power over creates these rigid hierarchies that ultimately cost the entire system. I mean, for a while there seemed to be a few privileged few at the top, but in many, many ways they cost them the most. But you just don't see it right away. Give power over a longer stretch of thousands of years, and you're going to see how poorly it performs. So you've got a system that works by care and presence. Leadership is care and presence. Care for self, care for other, care for the whole. Care for the whole. So, and that care isn't necessarily a kind of sentimental, wishy-washy, enabling caretaking. It is a powerful, like what is going to serve the whole, what is going to make sure that everyone is taken care of, what boundaries need to be set, what discipline needs to be put into place, and then presence, the deep abiding moment within this moment, that is very embodied. And so the lead horse is selected based on their ability to keep 5 core principles intact: safety, connection, peace, freedom, and joy. And you're right. Like the model is in the book as a Venn diagram, and it's meant to be very kind of 3D, almost holographic in a way. And each piece impacts another piece. And if you don't have safety, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, psychic, then you can't have connection. So they all impact each other, right?
Yes.
But the freedom piece is interesting that that's the one you zeroed in on. And that the freedom to be who you are, the freedom to express yourself as you are, freedom from oppression, freedom from shame. These are all kind of pieces that tie together in that freedom piece. And Uncle Bob is the one who really taught me about care, and care has to come with responsibility and accountability. Yes. So he has an indigenous term called Kanyini, Kanyini. You can watch a documentary about Uncle Bob on Netflix. It's like a 45-minute documentary, and it's called Kanyini. It's very beautiful. That, really care is nothing if it doesn't have this component. Like, it's what, how it is. You're with somebody who says they love and care about you, but if they're not accountable to their actions, then that care is toothless.
Yeah.
So care, right. It has to be, love isn't enough. It has to come with, this is how I'm going to show up. This is how I'm going to be accountable. This is how I'm going to be responsible for my actions. This is, how I'm going to be true to my word, all of that. And so that's real care. That's very robust.
Yeah.
And to do that, you have to be very, very present and self-aware, not only to your oneself, but to the one across from you. Yeah. And once that is like, that sort of like holds the freedom. It's not just, I get to have 50 guns whenever I want to because I'm free to, what the heck? No, that doesn't serve the whole. That doesn't isn't accountable to the others. That's not freedom. That's just entitlement. And I think that people blur and confuse the two, that freedom is entitlement. Freedom is not entitlement. Freedom is something that is very carefully cultivated through the capacity to hold freedom well.
Yes.
Responsibility, right?
That is so powerful. And I love what you said about without, I don't think you used this word, but like without boundaries, care is toothless, right? It's like there's no grit in it. There's nothing to chew on, to grasp hold of. And I think that is so powerful in rethinking like the care that we need to hold freedom with. That it's like, I think so often when conversations are had around like reframing freedom, it doesn't speak to the people who may want to have 50 guns, because it's like, I don't care about this like butterfly, I don't like this language, but hippy dippy bullshit that's like, no, I'm on my path, I'm doing my thing, I want to be strong, I want to be independent, I want to have this grit. And it's in a lot of ways almost tying it back to what we were talking about earlier with the toxicity that can sometimes come with spiritual communities, that it's like it's missing the forest for the trees. And that, okay, freedom, and maybe this like hyperbolic sense in which we've seen it devolve into entitlement, and like deep spirituality they're committing a similar crime, but on opposite ends of the spectrum. And
That's
what
right.
you're really suggesting here is calling into balance these things with a fierceness that creates safety. And without having both of these things, it doesn't work. And I think one thing I think a lot about with freedom is like the difference between the, John Lockean quote unquote perfect freedom that is, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want, versus a freedom that actually matters, that is
Right.
in community, right? Because you can't have perfect freedom outside of community. So it's how do we strike this balance when we're in community? Because that's what we all want, right?
Mhm.
But you still
Well,
want to be able to do,
we want it
yeah.
all. Yeah. Yeah. And that's not perfect freedom. That's just anarchy.
Yeah.
You
Yes.
know, and this is the thing is that, people can argue about these points all day long. You can't you cannot know what real freedom feels like until you're ready to embody what you and I were just talking about. A freedom that is both absolutely free and tethered to my spirit and how my spirit moves in the world, and absolutely tethered to the uh, existential responsibility that we are part of a larger whole.
Yes.
And until you feel that and experience it in your body, you really can't, you have no business talking about it to people because you don't know what you're talking about. And so people can be like, well, that's not freedom. Well, how would you know? You haven't even tasted what we're talking
Right.
about.
Right. It makes me think of what you said earlier about in order to transcend the ego, you have to have a well-formed ego, right? It's like you can't transcend something that you haven't
Right,
experienced that isn't
right,
there.
right. Right, exactly. So, in these places where people misconstrue what freedom really is, I would argue that, the unformed ego is well live and well there. it
Wow,
just
yeah.
shows, it, it just shows up in that manifestation as opposed to, say, getting caught up in a narcissistic guru story in a spiritual world. But we have very, very traumatized people who have not learned to be safe inside their own body or safe inside their community, that they could even feel what it's like to um, to be profoundly okay with themselves as is. This kind of, I get to do whatever I want whenever I want, is just like, it's an overflex of an I because there is no I there.
Right. Well, and I think it begs the question of why too, right? Like why would you want to do anything you want whenever you want, however you want? What's the purpose behind it? What's the meaning behind it? And I think that speaks to like what's the I behind it? Like what is this thing in the sense that human beings are all searching for meaning and what's going on here, that it's like you really have to tackle that question first. Um Within all of this, how, of course, both of us have a deep vested interest in helping people with this, and that's really what the book and your work as a whole speaks to. Um, but again, to honor what you said in the beginning, that it's like it's still learning, still growing, that this is not a perfectible practice. Um, how would you suggest anyone maybe kind of dip their toe into these waters to think about whether or not we may be overflexing, for those of us that are actively trying to help other people do it while we're learning, but also for those that maybe have never considered this before? What is kind of maybe a practice or a thought or something to check in on
Mm.
this journey?
Yeah, thank you. It's going to sound like a way oversimplification, but it's a simple doorway into something that's very, very complex and multi-layered impossibility. But I believe with everything I know that when we connect back to nature, even if we don't really necessarily vibe with nature, but when we connect back to nature, this is where we get in right relationship to ourselves and to the greater whole. So, and there's a way that nature, when it connects with us, alters our nervous system and our thinking and our frequency in a way that we just start to understand things better. And we start to understand ourselves better. And it's not necessarily a linear process, and it's not necessarily something that we totally conceptualize or understand, but it does seem to kind of create coherence, right?
Yeah.
And so I love to tell folks when they come here to the ranch that, and they've invested a considerable amount to do a retreat with me, that, on the surface, I'll be talking, we'll be in dialogue, we'll be doing exercises together, but make no mistake about it. There is a conversation happening between you and the trees, you and the soil, you and the horses, you and the sky, that it's having its way with you. And you don't, even if you have amnesia about your retreat, you are going to leave here changed.
Yeah.
And I love that, because it means, they can relax. And so if people just spent a little more time, either put a few more potted plants in their house, or just spent a little more time hanging out with their dog and just allowed that companionship to touch them, that they're going to find things get more aligned for themselves. So that would be the
That's so beautiful. I love that. And I think there is something to the sacred simplicity of it too, right? That's like, we don't need to overcomplicate each and every one of these things and make it feel so inaccessible. And speaking of the inaccessibility of a lot of this work, one thing that I wanted to ask you about is the way you talk about meditation in the book. And I think that even the gift that you give these retreat goers of saying, like, yes, we'll be doing things, but like, no matter what, you're gonna get something out of this. Like, take the pressure off of it, makes it so much easier to be. And in the meditation, in discussion around meditation, you talk about the difference between just being and meditating. And I found that personally so helpful, because I think I'm predisposed to, really wanting to lean into this kind of like, oh, I'm meditating, or like I'm going on a spiritual journey, or, all of these things. Like, that's certainly what how my constitution likes to make meaning. Why do you think it is that telling someone or inviting someone to just be instead of meditating makes it feel attainable and accessible? Because I think the language around meditation turns a lot of people off. And it's like, I can't do that. I can't just sit in silence and do nothing. What am I supposed to,
Right.
So yeah, talk to me about this and the accessibility of some of this work.
I'm delighted that you spotted that. So, let's see, where do I want to start? So first of all, I've always been a very sort of moving, active person, and always had a hard time with crossing my legs and sitting quietly for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. Our brain is always streaming thoughts. So good luck quieting the mind. That's not going to happen. You may find different states that arise sometimes, but honestly, none of that is necessarily worth a whole lot. It's just kind of mental acrobatics that are happening. And some people settle into their constitution is that they can settle into that much easier than others. I my teacher taught me that, and his teacher taught him, and his teacher was Ramana Maharshi, who was a sage in India. I think he died in the 1950s. He was known as the silent sage. He never said a word. He lived in a cave. But the point to meditation, aside from what the spiritual new age industrial complex wants to have you believe around, better creativity and less stress, the point of meditation in its truest form is to connect us with life itself, with consciousness, with God, the divine. That's the point. To remind our body that feels very separate from all of those things, to remind our body and our mind that we are in fact a part of a greater whole of consciousness. That's the point. To kind of, as my teacher would put it, to return to our beloved, for its own sake, not so that I am more stress-free, not so that I can be enlightened, because that's ridiculous. It's so that I can return to something that is really existentially close to my being here as a human on Earth. And so why wouldn't I want to visit that space 100 times a day? Why wouldn't I want to go back to my beloved and kiss them in the hallway 100 times a day? And so, so it's the spirit of like, oh, just every few moments, every few minutes, every few hours, just dropping into beingness for a few seconds to just like, oh yes, and this, oh yes, yes, this is what matters. And doing it kind of in that way, more sort of micro doses throughout the day, actually changes the fabric of your day, in a really beautiful way, because I can be like sweating over an Excel spreadsheet and like really in it, and then take a breath and drop into beingness, and then head back to it again. And I don't know, it's just like, it's that important hit of oxygen, and it makes my in person, in the world life feel divine.
Yeah.
As to like, I'm going to compartmentalize, and this morning from 9 to 9:30, I'm going to sit with my legs crossed and burn some incense, and then I'm going to go and be all stressed out for the rest of the day.
Right. Right. I was listening to a podcast episode with Rainn Wilson's Soul Boom podcast, and he talks a lot about this, and he was criticizing this idea that like, well, I'm going to be spiritual in my yoga class from 3 to 4:30
Right.
on Thursdays, and then the rest of life is whatever this
Right.
show is, this performance is. And it's like that. Yeah, just saying it in that way makes it sound so ridiculous, but it's like, is that not what we've kind of started doing? And you can't, if the whole point is to be connected, you can't separate it out in this way.
Right. Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
one thing
Yeah.
that you said, I mean, obviously that also really impacted me. I teared up a bit hearing you say it's returning to your beloved. Like, this word of beloved is just so like the thing that is held so precious. And I think that really opens the gateway to self-love, to seeing the humanity in others, right? Like all of these things that are so healing. One other thing you said that I want to go back to is not to be enlightened, because that's ridiculous. Talk to me about that. What is the ridiculous nature of the conversation we have around enlightenment? I think that I tend to agree with you in a lot of ways, but also it's nuanced, right? So talk
Yes,
to me
it's
about that.
very nuanced. Yes, yes. So, well, as long as there's a someone, so it's great. We've traveled this spectrum of being this embodied human in space and time on Earth, feet in the ground, feet in the soil, right? And having this intact ego, healthy, differentiated ego. And then we're going into this more transcendental place of like egolessness, right? And both exist in this amazing life, both, not one or the other. But so as we look towards this idea of enlightenment, Enlightenment is about understanding that there is no self, there is no ego, there is no human, there is no life. This is all just an illusion. All is just consciousness, bliss, whatever. But if you're a someone sitting down and having your meditation to give up your ego so that you can be enlightened, all you do is develop a spiritual ego.
Snaps on that. Wow. And then the journey really does become about how much can I separate from this thing, right? And it's like we lost the plot from the beginning.
Yes. So, and believe you me, as a very, very ambitious 28-year-old, I was, by golly, going to get enlightened. And I did everything, hey, I graduated cum laude in college. I was going to do it. I was going to do it. And of course,
Yeah.
I that was going to do it, it was just it was all spiritual ego. So, the ultimate enlightenment for me, I noticed it. I noticed the byproduct of my enlightenment, if I could call it that, was that I stopped talking about enlightenment. I stopped thinking about enlightenment. The byproduct was I stopped searching. I just started finding. And I don't even really know how to talk about all that, but, and to me, that's freedom. That's freedom. When one is untethered from the seeker, with all these ideas of who the seeker needs to be and how they need to behave, and how, because I think my idea of enlightenment was I was going to be a better version of me, like somehow not traumatized and like never triggered and like all this,
Yes, all of the things that are promised by like what you said, this kind of capitalist product that is spiritual enlightenment. It's like, since when could you commodify spirituality and connection? Like, how do we not see what we're missing? And one thing that really, really hit me in the book that I think, along this spectrum that we're talking about between those in the spiritual community that kind of fall into this trap in a maybe like couched in a way that seems more enlightened versus the communities of, I'll call them entitlement, in that it's what freedom devolves into, even though I hope that doesn't sound judgmental, because it's not how I'm just using it as like a moniker for that space. That both of these kind of pathways, it's about doing and accomplishing and achieving something, right? Like there is some box to be checked, and like enlightenment, did it, done. Or like freedom, did it, got it, we're good. And it's just so counterintuitive to what the thing actually is. And you write, whenever I see a lifestyle hinged on speed, efficiency, and hectic busyness, I see a life run by shame. And was that not just the most beautiful call in that I needed to be reminded of, like, it doesn't matter what hecticness or busyness or how worthy you view these boxes as. If you still see them as boxes to be checked, there is some shame under that.
Yeah.
Talk to me about this. There's not a specific question in there, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, and really shame is such a big, pervasive, ubiquitous phenomenon in our society, because that's how a power over paradigm keeps intact, is through shame. And sort of to way oversimplify it, shame is essentially the message or the belief that I'm not okay as is. There's a lot of like legs and things that go out from that, but I'm not okay as is. I'm not enlightened, therefore I need to get a teacher and I need to become and again, these things are sort of paradoxical, because that doesn't mean I don't go to a therapist. It doesn't mean I don't have a coach. It doesn't mean that I don't like still engage in processes that are going to help my world a little easier, a little clearer, a little more aligned. But the difference is that it's not coming from a place of I'm broken, I need to be healed, I'm not okay the way I am. When you finally unshame yourself, and really, really recognize that as is right now, I am okay and a perfect snowflake.
That's right.
From there, life starts to become really interesting. But before that point, you're just checking boxes because there's something missing and it needs to be, filled. And the unshaming process it's a lot of unlearning. It's a lot of unlearning because that's just how, shame is a way that we shape human beings so that they can fit into the cog of the wheel of the power over system that we're in. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Wow. No, that's so powerful. And I think beginning with this realization of your perfectly imperfect snowflakeness, I think it's like that's the journey, right? Is to continue returning to that belovedness, right? That state that is never done, it's never checked, but it's always kind of there. And one thing you mentioned a bit ago is that you stopped searching and you started finding, and you said it in a way that it implied, at least this was my interpretation of what you said, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that the searching is really what we don't want to stop, and that the finding is really what shuts down this curiosity, this openness, this eye towards the belovedness. And you did say you don't really know how to begin talking about that experience, but of course that means I desperately want to ask you to try and start talking about that experience.
Yeah. Well, so what I said is that, things became more whole for me when I stopped searching and started finding. Meaning, so it's a little different than how you took it, meaning that search came from a place of lack. I'm searching. It's a little bit like, if you meet let's use the beloved as a metaphor. If you meet your beloved in the hallway and you feel like maybe you're not quite enough for them, you're going to seek their validation through the kiss, the way they look at you. And there is this like seeking for something that will validate who you are. When you come to the beloved or to your life or to your anything, knowing you're complete, knowing you're already whole, knowing that there is not one thing about you that is broken, then you find the love that's already there from the beloved. Got it?
Yes. Well, in this, like, the curiosity and the evolution of the journey exists within the thing that is already found, right? It's like encapsulated in the wholeness. I hear it. I hear it.
Exactly. And so, I am more curious than ever.
Right.
And that curiosity is so pure because it's not curious because if I don't get that thing or find that thing, I'm going to be broken. Right.
Yeah.
So it's just this wonder curiosity that is it's just more confident in the space.
Yeah. Because it's not grounded in the conclusion of it. It's not, solving a mystery, but just like experiencing the mystery instead. Yeah. Well, I do want to be mindful of your time and how generous you have been with it. So as we head into the conclusion portion of the podcast, One, for all of our listeners, Kelly and her beautiful book, Flying Lead Change, as well as information on her organization, Equus, will all be linked down below wherever you are listening or watching to explore and experience and continue to learn and read her beautiful words. So please definitely go check all of that out in your beautiful curiosity, dear listener. But Kelly, first final question. Is there anything in light of our conversation that we missed, that we didn't get to, that you want to clarify, that you want to add in? Anything at all? This is space for you to use however you see fit.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like we've been so thorough. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I wrote down a ton of notes after we were speaking there's just a lot. So I really appreciate the space that you hold so that so much can come out that one wouldn't expect. I really appreciate that. But no, I feel very complete. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. I similarly have all sorts of notes. I can't do these podcasts without a pen or pencil in my hand. So I so appreciate your openness and willingness to go all over with me. Last question to hopefully put a little button on our conversation as much as one can with these things, because the box is never checked.
Right.
But what is one word to describe how you're feeling right now, your current state?
Great.
I am too. I have to concur. Kelly, thank you so much for your time and energy for this beautiful book and all that you do. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you so very much for being here today for this conversation, and a huge thank you to Kelly for her time and energy and contribution to this world and all of this beautiful work and to Making Meaning. This was the first episode I recorded for season 4, and it just made me so excited for all that is to come with Cohere and with Making Meaning, and I just can't wait to continue having amazing conversations, and I'm so grateful to Kelly for sharing her wisdom with all of us. Like I mentioned up top, if you are interested in reading Flying Lead Change or working with Kelly, all of those links will be in the description down below wherever you are listening or watching. If you are curious about the Cohere Collective, how to live life coherently, or want assistance as you seek truth, links to work with us and to other content and offerings are down below as well. A huge thank you to Nicole Oesterreicher for making Meaning's art and podcast cover. You can find her on Instagram, links below. And a big thank you to Tristan Morgan for making Meaning's theme music, links below too. Right now, I am feeling peacefully excited is what came up. I wanted to say peaceful, but then I was like, but I also have this energy that I'm excited to lean into about moving forward. I feel like I'm in a new stage of life that is really balancing this idea of like settling back and settling in, and pairing that with forward movement and momentum and action. And I think so often we think, oh, I'm in a period of rest and receptivity, or I'm in a period of action and hard work. And I think we generally all need all of that at the same time. In spiritual communities, you'll often heard this referred to as like stepping into your divine feminine energy, that is rest and nurturing yourself and receiving things, which is absolutely beautiful. And then divine masculine energy, which is about action and forward motion and momentum, which is also deeply important. But we all have both of those things within us. And I don't think it's as much about prioritizing one or the other as it is about learning how to balance them in the different areas of your life. And it is this equilibrium that I'm really feeling myself called to right now. And I'm really trying to work on cultivating within my life, being able to have these moments of rest, restoration, and receptivity, receiving, while at the same time being generative and expansive and moving forward. That just because my body does need rest doesn't mean I can't also be moving forward rapidly, and just because there's things I'm excited to create doesn't mean that 24/7 has to be movement. We can have both. We should have both, because we are both. So peacefully excited, calmly energized, balance. That's how I'm feeling. Thank you all so very much for being here today, for being a part of Making Meaning. More meaning is made when it hits your ears. This podcast is whatever it is to you. That's the most important part of it. And I'm truly so grateful for that part that you play. The part that you play is my favorite part of it. And I'm so grateful, again, that you play that part. I would love to know what you think about today's episode or any other episodes. So as always, let me know down below. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. And until then, I hope you feel like you are living more coherently. Until then, love.